My name is Taya Bennett. I am 34. 4 hours after I delivered my stillborn daughter, I lay in a recovery room at a Denver hospital, staring at the ceiling tiles while my mother stood in the hallway and told my aunt that losing my baby was a blessing. She said it loud enough for the night nurse to hear every word. She said she was not even born. It is not like losing a real child. She called my daughter defective. She said God had spared the family a financial and social burden. My husband Nathan sat in the corner vinyl chair. His face was buried in his hands. He had not spoken in 3 hours. His grief was a crushing weight pressing him into the upholstery. Our daughter Lily was gone before she ever took a breath. And 10 feet away, on the other side of a wooden door, my mother was networking her tragedy. I did not hear the hallway conversation. Clara, the night shift nurse, heard it. Clara walked into my room and clicked the door shut, cutting off the fluorescent light from the corridor. She bypassed my IV drip. She did not check my blood pressure cuff. She walked straight to the edge of my bed, sat on the mattress, and looked me directly in the eye. "I need you to know something about your mother," Clara said. Her voice was a low, tight whisper. "Because if I were in your shoes, I would want the truth before she walks back in here." Welcome back to Q Told Stories, where quiet women set loud boundaries and the truth always finds its moment. If you have ever had your deepest grief weaponized by the people who were supposed to protect you, this one will strike a nerve. Tell me your age in the comments, let me know where you are listening from, and be sure to subscribe. Let me give you some context. I am a healthcare compliance auditor. My career revolves around identifying discrepancies, tracking anomalies, and maintaining strict order when systems fail. When my world shatters, my brain defaults to data. I do not panic, I observe. "Tell me," I said to Clara. My voice sounded hollow, stripped of everything but the demand for facts. Clara relayed the rest of the conversation. Helen, my mother, was not just spinning the stillbirth as a relief. She was laying the groundwork for a campaign. Clara described watching Helen hand my Aunt Barbara a thick, cream-colored envelope, whispering about memorial arrangements and sympathy funds. Helen was soliciting donations while I was still bleeding. Nathan raised his head. His eyes were bloodshot and swollen. "What kind of envelope?" he asked. His voice caught on the syllables. Before Clara could answer, the brass door handle turned. Clara stood up and smoothed her scrubs, stepping back into the role of the invisible caregiver. Helen swept into the room. Her expression shifted instantly into a mask of profound, practiced agony. She pressed a tissue to her collarbone, playing the part of the devastated grandmother for the invisible cameras she always imagined were watching her. She wore a tailored charcoal blazer and pearl earrings. She looked dressed for a board meeting, not a maternity ward. "Oh, my poor sweet girl," Helen murmured. She glided toward the bed. "I've been updating the family. Everyone is just heartbroken for us." Us. The word hung in the sterile air. I did not blink. I looked past her shoulder to the designer leather purse hanging from her forearm. The zipper sat open just enough to reveal a neat, banded stack of those same cream-colored envelopes. My chest tightened. It was not fresh tears. It was the cold, familiar focus of an audit beginning. Helen reached out to stroke my forehead. I turned my face away. Just a fraction of an inch. Just enough so her fingers met the empty air. "I am very tired, Helen," I said. She withdrew her hand, her mouth tightening into a thin line. She hated being called by her first name. It broke the illusion of the warm maternal bond she spent decades curating for her country club friends. "Of course you are," she said. Her voice dripped with performed sympathy. "You rest. I will handle the logistics. You do not need to worry about a single thing." She patted the edge of my bed. I watched her hand. I watched the purse. I watched the envelopes. I knew exactly what she meant by logistics. Helen had spent her entire life erasing my struggles to maintain the illusion of a perfect upper-class Colorado family. I survived her by relying strictly on data and self-sufficiency. Nathan stood up from the vinyl chair. He walked over and stood between my mother and my bed. He did not yell. He did not raise his voice. He just stood there, blocking her view of me. "We need quiet right now, Helen," Nathan said. Helen offered a tight, condescending smile. She turned on her heel and walked out. The door clicked shut. The room returned to the rhythmic hum of the heart monitor, but the air had changed. I was no longer just a grieving mother. I was an auditor, and my target had just handed me the first piece of paper. The heavy wooden door clicked shut, trapping the quiet back inside the room. Nathan did not move from his stance at the foot of my bed. He stood like a sentinel. His jaw was locked, his shoulders rigid under a wrinkled gray sweater. Clara, the night nurse, remained by the blood pressure monitor. She let out a slow, measured breath. "She was not just talking to your aunt," Clara said. Her voice dropped even lower, carrying the professional caution of someone breaking hospital protocol. I turned my head on the stiff pillow. The synthetic fabric rustled against my ear. "Go on," I said. Clara crossed her arms over her faded blue scrubs. "I have worked on this maternity floor for 12 years. I have seen every kind of grief. I know what a grieving family looks like. And I know what a fundraiser looks like. Your mother held court in the waiting room for 2 hours while you were sedated. She did not just hand an envelope to your Aunt Barbara. She passed them to your cousins. She gave one to Nathan's parents when they came off the elevator. She had a stack of them." My analytical mind, trained to dissect financial records and compliance failures, cataloged the information. Envelopes, plural, handed out in a hospital waiting room to traumatized relatives. "Did you see what was written on them?" I asked. Clara nodded. The envelopes were pre-printed. They had return labels on them. The text read, "The Lilly Memorial Fund, care of Helen Sterling." Nathan let out a sound that was half scoff, half choke. He dragged a hand down his exhausted face. "A memorial fund," he repeated. "She is running a charity drive outside the room where her daughter just delivered a stillborn baby. She told them she was shielding you from the financial burden of the arrangements," Clara added. "She told everyone to direct their contributions to her so you would not have to deal with the stress. People were reaching for their checkbooks before they even asked how you were doing." The pieces snapped into a grid inside my head. Helen was not shielding me. She was isolating the revenue stream. By positioning herself as the gatekeeper of my tragedy, she controlled the narrative and the capital. It was a textbook exploitation model. Clara checked her watch. "My shift ends in an hour. I am not supposed to tell you any of this. But no mother deserves to be handled like a public relations crisis on the worst night of her life." "Thank you, Clara," I said. "I will not forget this." Clara adjusted my IV line with practiced efficiency and slipped out of the room. The silence rushed back in. Nathan walked over and sat on the edge of the mattress. He took my hand. His fingers were warm and rough. We did not speak. We did not need to. We just held on to each other as the sky outside the window turned from pitch black to a bruised, pale purple. 2 hours later, the morning sun broke over the distant peaks of the Rocky Mountains, casting harsh white light through the hospital blinds. The door swung open. Helen returned. She wore a fresh outfit, a navy silk blouse and tailored slacks. She carried a cardboard tray holding 2 artisan coffees and a paper bag from an expensive bakery down the street. She looked energized. Tragedy always invigorated my mother. It provided her with a stage, an audience, and a mandate to direct the lives of everyone around her. "I brought breakfast," Helen announced, setting the tray on the rolling tray table. "You both need to keep your strength up. The next few days are going to be very demanding." Nathan stared at the coffee cups as if they were toxic. "We are not hungry, Helen," he said. "Nonsense," she replied briskly. "You have to eat. Let me just get you a napkin." Helen reached into her oversized leather designer tote. She pushed aside a makeup bag and a leather wallet, digging for a tissue. As she pulled her hand out, the zipper caught the edge of a folded piece of paper. The paper snagged, slipped free, and fluttered to the sterile linoleum floor. It landed face up, right next to Nathan's shoe. Nathan looked down. He did not move to pick it up. He just stared at it. I leaned over the bed rail. My vision focused on the crisp blue rectangle with a bank logo printed in the corner. It was a personal check. The handwriting belonged to my Uncle Richard. The amount was for $500. The memo line read, "For Lily." Helen froze. For a fraction of a second, the polished country club matriarch vanished, replaced by a woman caught mid-theft. But Helen had spent decades mastering the art of the pivot. She let out a soft, rehearsed sigh, bent down, and scooped the check off the floor. "Your Uncle Richard is so generous," Helen said. She tucked the check swiftly back into her purse. "He wanted to help with the floral arrangements for the service. I told him it was not necessary, but he insisted." I kept my voice perfectly flat. My career relies on finding the emotionless center of a conflict and staying there while the other party unravels. I call it weaponized stillness. "Why is Uncle Richard writing checks to you for my daughter's funeral?" I asked. Helen smoothed the front of her silk blouse. "I am just trying to handle the logistics, Thea. You just went through a profound physical trauma. You and Nathan are in no condition to negotiate with funeral directors or caterers. I am taking the burden off your shoulders. You should be thanking me." She played the victim flawlessly. She weaponized her maternal assistance, framing my valid question as an ungrateful attack on her generosity. "I do not want you handling the logistics," I said. My voice did not shake. "Give me the check." Helen clutched the strap of her purse. Her eyes narrowed. "Do not be ridiculous. Richard gave this to me to manage." "Then give me the list," I countered. "If you are collecting money on my behalf, I need a detailed ledger of every person who donated, the exact amount they gave, and the date the funds were received. I need it by noon." Helen stared at me. She expected tears. She expected me to bury my face in my hands and beg her to make the pain go away. She did not expect an audit. "You are not thinking straight," Helen said. Her tone shifted from wounded mother to condescending authority. "The sedatives are making you paranoid. Your hormones are crashing. You are looking for a villain because you are hurting, and you are taking it out on the only person trying to hold this family together." It was classic gaslighting. She was pathologizing my grief to discredit my observations. This was not new. Helen had spent my entire childhood erasing my reality to maintain her pristine illusion. I grew up in a massive house in Cherry Creek, surrounded by manicured lawns and wealthy neighbors. When I was 10, I fell off a horse and fractured my collarbone. It was 2 days before the annual country club holiday portrait. Helen did not take me to the emergency room until the photos were taken. She forced me into a stiff, itchy wool sweater to hide my unnatural posture. She told the photographer I was just being sulky. I learned that day that my pain was a threat to her aesthetic. I learned that the only thing I could trust was data. Numbers did not lie. Numbers did not care about aesthetics. "I am not paranoid, Helen," I said. "I am asking for a basic accounting of funds collected in my daughter's name." Helen let out a sharp, dismissive breath. "I will not be interrogated in a hospital room. I am going home to shower. We can discuss this when you are in a more rational state of mind." She grabbed the cardboard tray of coffees, threw it into the trash can with a loud crash, and marched out of the room. The door slammed behind her. Nathan looked at me. His eyes were wide with a mixture of awe and simmering rage. "She is stealing from our dead child," he whispered. "She is building a slush fund," I corrected, "and we are going to find out exactly how deep it goes." 10 minutes later, Clara returned for the morning shift change. She carried a fresh pitcher of ice water and a stack of discharge paperwork. She checked my vitals one last time. "Clara," I said, leaning forward against the rails. "Hospital policy dictates that visitors must sign in at the security desk downstairs before being granted access to the maternity ward, correct?" Clara paused, holding the blood pressure cuff. "Yes, everyone has to show ID and get a printed badge." "I need copies of the visitor logs for this floor from the last 24 hours, I said. "I need to know the name of every single person who stepped off that elevator." Clara looked at the closed door, then back at me. "Security does not hand those out to patients." "I know," I said. "But if a nurse requested a copy to verify a potential exposure to a respiratory infection, security would print it without a second thought." Clara studied my face. She saw the cold, calculated grief operating behind my eyes. She knew she was risking a reprimand. She also knew she was looking at a mother preparing to go to war. "I will be back in 10 minutes, Clara said. The door clicked shut. I rested my head back against the pillows. Helen thought she was dealing with a broken daughter. She did not realize she had just triggered a forensic investigation. We drove back to our house in the Denver suburbs in utter silence. The afternoon sun baked the asphalt, but the inside of Nathan's sedan felt like a walk-in freezer. Every bump in the road radiated through my core. My body was recovering from childbirth. My arms were empty. All I wanted was the sanctuary of my own walls. I craved the quiet predictability of our home. I wanted to close the front door and lock the rest of the world out. Nathan parked in the driveway and killed the engine. He unbuckled his seatbelt, walked around to the passenger side, and helped me stand. He carried my small canvas overnight bag in his left hand and kept his right arm firmly wrapped around my waist. We walked up the concrete steps together. I slid my key into the deadbolt. The lock turned with a familiar click. I pushed the heavy oak door open. Something was wrong. The air smelled like lemon polish and cardboard. I heard the clink of ceramic mugs coming from the kitchen. My heart performed a slow, heavy thud against my ribs. Nathan dropped the canvas bag on the hardwood floor. He stepped in front of me, shielding my body with his own. Helen walked out of the kitchen. She was holding a mug of my favorite herbal tea. Right behind her was Olivia, my younger sister. Olivia wore a pristine white cashmere cardigan and a look of deep, practiced concern. Olivia is 3 years younger than me. She is the golden child. Growing up, if Olivia wanted my bicycle, Helen painted it pink and handed it over. If Olivia ruined my science fair project, Helen told me I should have stored it somewhere else. Olivia never learned consequence because Helen paved every inch of her life with my sacrifices. "What are you doing in my house?" Nathan demanded. His voice was a low rumble of pure warning. Helen set the mug on the entryway console table. She offered a soft, placating smile. "We let ourselves in with the emergency key," she said. "We knew you two were coming home today. We wanted to prepare the house. We wanted to spare you the pain." The pain. The words snagged in my mind. "Spare us from what?" I asked. My voice sounded flat. Olivia stepped forward. She placed a comforting hand on her collarbone. "The baby gear, Taya," she murmured. "We knew walking past that room would just destroy you. We took care of it." My blood turned to ice water. I pushed past Nathan. I ignored the sharp ache in my abdomen and walked down the hallway toward the second bedroom on the right. The door stood wide open. I stopped in the threshold. The room was hollow. 3 days ago, this space was a nursery. Nathan had spent a weekend assembling a $1,200 mahogany crib. I had folded dozens of swaddles, arranging them by color in the cedar dresser. We hung a custom mobile of felted clouds above the mattress. Now the crib was gone. The dresser was gone. The rocking chair, the changing table, the stacks of diapers, all of it vanished. The room was stripped down to the bare drywall and the beige carpet. They had erased my daughter from her own home. I stood frozen in the doorway. My eyes scanned the empty space, desperate for proof that Lily had ever existed here. My gaze dropped to the floor. Near the baseboard, partially wedged under the edge of the patterned area rug, was a single pale pink pacifier. It had fallen out of a box during their frantic packing. It lay there on the carpet, a devastating visual representation of a mother's erased child. I stared at the silicone nipple, the curved plastic shield. It was the only thing left. Nathan came up behind me. He looked over my shoulder into the barren room. I felt his chest hitch. He let out a ragged, guttural breath. "Where are the boxes?" Nathan asked. He spun around to face Helen and Olivia, who had followed us down the hall. "Where is my daughter's furniture?" Helen took a step back, raising her hands in a gesture of maternal surrender. "Now, Nathan, do not raise your voice. We did this out of love." Sitting in a house full of empty baby things is psychological torture. I read an article about it. "We packed it all up to give you a clean slate." Nathan closed the distance between them. He towered over my mother. "I want it back," he said. "Bring the boxes back to this house today." Olivia crossed her arms. Her cashmere cardigan slipped slightly off one shoulder. "You are being irrational, Nathan," she said. We do not have the boxes. The small stuff went to the dump. The expensive items have already been donated to someone who can actually use them. To someone who can actually use them. The sentence hung in the hallway, toxic and thick. Olivia delivered the words casually, a careless flick of the wrist. She did not say, donated to a family in need. She said, someone who can actually use them. It was a calculated dig, a reminder that my body had failed while her world continued spinning perfectly on its axis. Nathan lunged forward. I caught his wrist. I gripped his sleeve and pulled him back. My brain filtered out the cruelty and locked onto the phrasing. Olivia was arrogant, but she was also greedy. She coveted luxury. She drove a leased imported SUV she could barely afford. The mahogany crib alone was worth over $1,000. The designer stroller was another $800. Olivia would never hand those items over to a generic Goodwill center. My analytical mind engaged. I stepped in front of my husband. I looked directly into my sister's eyes. I did not scream. I did not cry. I employed the same tone I use when informing a hospital administrator that their billing department is under federal review. Donated, I repeated. Olivia lifted her chin. Yes, to a local charity. It is what Lily would have wanted. I ignored the grotesque manipulation. Which charity? I asked. Helen stepped in, sensing a trap she could not quite see. Just a local women's shelter, Thea. It does not matter. The point is, the items are gone, and you can begin your healing process. It matters a great deal, Helen, I replied. My voice was smooth, cool, and relentless. Those items were purchased with our joint checking account. The total retail value exceeds $3,000. Since you took it upon yourselves to donate our property, Nathan and I will need the official tax deduction receipts. The hallway went dead silent. Olivia blinked. Her confident posture wilted by a fraction of an inch. Tax receipts, she echoed. Yes, I said. The IRS requires itemized, signed receipts from a registered charitable organization for any physical donation claiming a value over $500. If you drop those items at a shelter, they provided you with a carbon copy receipt. I need those documents by tomorrow morning so I can file them with our accountant. Helen and Olivia exchanged a rapid, panicked look. It was a microscopic shift, but to an auditor, it was a glaring red siren. They did not have the receipts. You do not get a tax receipt when you keep the merchandise for yourself. We threw the paperwork away, Helen stammered. Her voice lacked its usual polish. We were not thinking about taxes, Thea. We were thinking about your mental health. Then you will need to call the shelter and request a duplicate, I said. You have their contact information, correct? Or did you just leave a mahogany crib on a random sidewalk? Olivia tugged at the hem of her sweater. I do not remember the name of the place. We just drove around until we found a donation bin. You put a fully assembled crib into a clothing donation bin, I asked. Olivia flushed a deep mottled red. Stop interrogating us. We did you a favor. You are acting unhinged. I am acting like a property owner, requesting a paper trail, I corrected. Leave my key on the console table. Both of you need to get out of my house. Now. Helen puffed up her chest, preparing to deliver a lecture on respect. I did not give her the chance. I stepped forward, invading her personal space, forcing her to take a step backward toward the front door. I said, "Get out," I repeated. The volume of my voice did not change, but the temperature dropped to freezing. Helen grabbed her purse. She motioned for Olivia to follow. You need professional help, Thea, Helen sneered over her shoulder. This hostility is toxic. We will check on you when you are ready to apologize. The front door opened and shut with a sharp click. The house settled into a heavy, ringing silence. Nathan stood in the hallway, his breathing ragged. He looked at the empty room, then at me. They stole it, he said. Yes, I answered. I walked into the barren nursery. I knelt on the beige carpet and carefully picked up the pale pink pacifier. I held the small piece of silicone in my palm. I closed my fingers around it, feeling its edges press into my skin. It grounded me. It anchored my focus. I walked back out of the room. I grasped the brass doorknob, pulled the door shut, and turned the lock. The metallic sound echoed down the hallway. "I am going to find out exactly where my daughter's things went," I told Nathan, "and when I find them, I am going to make them pay for every single missing piece." I returned to my desk the next morning. My home office became my fortress. I locked the door, booted up my dual monitors, and pulled up a blank spreadsheet. My profession requires me to separate emotion from evidence. I evaluate billing codes, cross-reference routing numbers, and flag systemic irregularities. Sitting in that ergonomic chair, listening to the hum of the computer tower, I built a firewall around my grief. I created a secure digital directory on my encrypted drive. I established a strict color coding system. Yellow represented theft. Red indicated wire fraud. I clicked the mouse, dragging empty folders into their designated lanes. My fingers moved across the keyboard with rapid mechanical precision. The data served as a shield, keeping the crushing weight of the empty nursery at bay. I started with the yellow folder. Olivia claimed the nursery furniture went to a charity bin. Liars often falter because they underestimate the digital footprint of their own vanity. Olivia posted her entire life online. She craved validation the way normal people required oxygen. I opened a new browser tab and navigated to her public social media profiles. I scrolled through her recent updates, pictures of her expensive iced lattes, complaints about the Denver traffic. Then a photo uploaded late last night caught my eye. The caption read, "Organizing the basement, so exhausted, but staying strong for my family." The image featured Olivia posing in front of a wall of plastic storage bins. She wore premium athletic wear and a tragic, practiced pout. But she was a sloppy criminal. In the lower right corner of the frame, partially obscured by a stack of winter coats, sat the unmistakable curved leg of a $1,200 mahogany crib. Tucked right behind it was the folded chassis of our imported stroller. The leather handle grips caught the glare of the basement overhead lights. She did not donate the items. She hid them in her own house. I stared at the pixelated image on my high-definition monitor. My sister looked into the camera lens, performing exhaustion while guarding the stolen property of her dead niece. She kept the luxury goods for herself. Perhaps she planned to sell them. Perhaps she wanted to keep them for a future child of her own. The motive did not matter to an auditor. Only the possession mattered. I took a high-resolution screenshot. I captured the date, the timestamp, and the geolocation tag embedded in the post. I dragged the image file into the yellow folder. The theft was documented. The evidence was irrefutable. I pivoted to the red folder. I remembered Clara mentioning the cream-colored envelopes in the hospital waiting room. The Lilly Memorial Fund, care of Helen Sterling. I opened the Colorado Secretary of State Business Database. I typed the fund name into the corporate registry search bar. No results appeared. The charity was not a registered nonprofit entity in our state. It had no tax-exempt status. It was a phantom organization. Next, I ran a broader internet search using the exact phrasing from the envelope. The third result down was a link to a popular crowdfunding platform. I clicked the URL. The page loaded. A large, high-quality photograph filled the center of my screen. It was a picture of me, taken 2 years ago at a family holiday dinner. I was smiling. Beneath the photo, bold black text read, "Support Thea in her darkest hour." The organizer was listed as Helen Sterling. The fundraising goal was $20,000. The progress bar showed over $15,000 already collected from 74 unique donors. I read the campaign description. It was a masterpiece of emotional manipulation. Helen wrote about the sudden, tragic loss of her beloved granddaughter. She described my profound physical and emotional devastation. Then she lied. She stated that Nathan and I were drowning in unexpected medical debt and exorbitant bereavement expenses. She urged our community to donate generously, promising that every dollar would go directly toward easing our financial burden during this impossible time. Nathan and I had premium health insurance. Our out-of-pocket maximum was met months ago. We had zero medical debt. The funeral arrangements were already paid in full from our joint savings account. We did not need a single dime. I scrolled through the donor list. I recognized names from Helen's country club distant relatives and former co-workers. People were giving $50, $100, even $500 at a time. They thought they were helping a grieving mother. They were actually funding my mother's illicit revenue stream. I needed to know where the capital was resting. Crowdfunding platforms require a verified bank account to disperse funds. I opened a specialized forensic accounting tool on my second monitor, a software suite I use to trace dark money in corporate audits. I pulled the public metadata from the campaign page. It took me 45 minutes of digging through digital breadcrumbs to trace the withdrawal destination. The funds were not routing to a personal checking account. They were funneling into a limited liability company called Sterling Heritage Holdings. I returned to the state registry and searched the LLC. The registered agent was Helen Sterling. The principal address was a commercial suite in Cherry Creek. I cross-referenced the address. It was the exact location of Helen's exclusive social club. She had created a shell company, tied it to her private club, and was filtering the stolen donations through it to mask the income. It was textbook wire fraud. I downloaded the campaign ledger, the LLC registration documents, and the metadata routing proofs. I saved them as encrypted PDF files. I dragged every single document into the red folder. My cell phone vibrated against the wooden desktop. The sudden buzz broke the quiet rhythm of my investigation. The screen lit up with a text message from Helen. "Thea, darling," the message read, "I know you are isolating, but you need to be around people who love you. I am hosting a private healing luncheon tomorrow afternoon at the club. It is just close friends and family. You must attend. It will be so good for your spirit. Wear something elegant." I read the text twice. A private healing luncheon at the club? The same club where her Shell LLC was registered? The same club populated by the wealthy donors on the crowdfunding page? Helen was not hosting a grief circle. She was throwing a fundraising gala. She was using the luncheon to solicit more donations in person, and she needed her grieving daughter present to serve as the silent, tragic prop. She needed me to sit in a chair and look broken so the checkbooks would open wider. My hands hovered over the keyboard. I felt a cold, calculated calm wash over my entire body. Helen assumed I would decline. She expected me to hide in my house and let her control the narrative by default. If I did not show up, she could play the role of the valiant mother holding the fort while her daughter fell apart. I picked up the phone. I did not type a long, emotional refusal. I did not demand answers about the fundraiser or the stolen crib. Confrontation without a trapped audience is a waste of leverage. I needed her confident. I needed her to believe her illusion remained impenetrable. I typed a single sentence. "I will be there, Helen." I sent the message. I watched the delivery confirmation appear on the screen. I set the phone down and looked back at my dual monitors. The red and yellow folders sat in the center of the digital desktop, heavy with irrefutable proof. I was going to this country club luncheon. I was not going to mourn. I was going to conduct an on-site audit, gather the final pieces of admissible evidence, and prepare to burn her fake charity to the ground. I closed the spreadsheet, locked my screen, and stood up from the desk. The armor was fully in place. The investigation was active. Helen wanted a prop for her gala. She was going to get an auditor instead. Nathan and I pulled through the wrought iron gates of the Cherry Creek Country Club at noon. The sky was a sharp, cloudless blue. I wore a tailored slate gray suit. It was the armor of an auditor arriving to inspect a failing corporation. Nathan wore a dark navy blazer. He held the steering wheel with a rigid grip. We parked and walked into the grand foyer. The air smelled of expensive lilies and polished mahogany. A large easel stood outside the banquet room doors. A poster board rested on it. It was not a picture of my daughter. It was a blown-up photograph of Helen. She was staring out a window looking pensive and appropriately tragic. The caption beneath it read, "A grandmother's love, healing through giving." I did not flinch. I noted the visual manipulation and walked through the double doors. The banquet hall was decorated with excessive floral centerpieces. Waiters circulated with silver trays of champagne. Over 50 guests mingled near the bar. These were not my close friends. These were Helen's associates. Real estate developers, local politicians, members of the club board. They wore pastel dresses and golf casual attire. The atmosphere was convivial, bordering on festive. It looked like a networking event decorated with grief. Aunt Barbara intercepted us before we reached our table. She clutched a crystal flute of sparkling wine. She placed a hand on my forearm. Her eyes brimmed with manufactured sympathy. "Thea, darling, we are just so proud of you," Barbara said. "Letting your mother channel her grief into this charity is such a beautiful gesture. It is giving her a purpose after such a devastating loss." I looked at the hand resting on my sleeve. I did not pull away. I let the data gather. Barbara believed I had authorized this. Helen had convinced her social circle that I was a willing participant in this fraudulent enterprise. "I am glad you are enjoying the event, Barbara," I replied. My voice was even. Barbara smiled, oblivious to the frost in my tone, and wandered back toward the buffet. We found our assigned seats near the front. Helen sat at the center of the head table. Olivia sat next to her, wearing a fitted designer maternity dress purchased with stolen funds. A waiter poured sparkling water into my glass. I watched the bubbles rise. A spoon clinked against a microphone. The room quieted down. Olivia stood up and walked to the podium. She adjusted the microphone stand. Her posture exuded practiced humility. "Thank you all for coming today," Olivia began. Her voice echoed through the banquet hall speakers. "This has been a season of unimaginable sorrow for our family. Losing Lily left a void we thought could never be filled." Olivia paused, pressing a hand to her chest. She looked out at the audience. "But joy comes in the morning. Out of the darkest tragedy, light finds a way to return. And today, I want to share a piece of that light with all of you. My husband and I are expecting our first child this spring." The banquet hall erupted into applause. Women dabbed their eyes with linen napkins. Men raised their champagne flutes. Olivia beamed, soaking in the adulation. She had hijacked a memorial service for a dead infant to announce her own pregnancy. She stole the spotlight, turning my tragedy into her prologue. Helen stood up from her chair and walked to the podium. She wrapped her arm around Olivia. Helen leaned into the microphone. "God is so good," Helen declared over the clapping. "He always provides a way forward. This new life is His way of replacing our broken branch." Replacing our broken branch. The phrase landed on the table like a physical weight. Nathan sat beside me. He did not shout. He did not flip the table. He reached for his silver salad fork. He gripped the metal handle so tightly his knuckles turned stark white. The tendons in his wrists strained against his skin. I reached under the table and placed my hand over his knee. I pressed down a silent command to hold steady. I picked up my glass of sparkling water. I took a slow sip. My face remained an unreadable, stoic mask. I did not let them see a single fracture. An auditor does not react to the crime. An auditor documents it. The applause died down. The guests began eating their catered salads. Helen returned to her seat at our table. She signaled a waiter for a refill of her wine. She was flushed with the success of her performance. She felt untouchable. Hubris is the greatest vulnerability in any fraudulent system. I reached into my blazer pocket. I pulled out my cell phone. I discreetly opened the voice memo application, tapped the record button, and set the device face down next to my water glass. The microphone pointed directly at my mother. "The event turned out beautifully, Helen," I said. My tone was conversational, mimicking the idle chatter of a compliant daughter. "You must have raised a significant amount on the crowdfunding page to cover all these floral arrangements and catering costs." Helen took a sip of her wine. She waved a hand in a dismissive gesture. "Oh, the online campaign has been wonderfully successful. People are so generous when they see a family standing strong." I tilted my head slightly. "How are you distributing the capital?" I asked. "There must be complex tax implications for moving that volume of cash into a personal account." Helen laughed. It was a sharp, arrogant sound. She leaned closer, eager to demonstrate her financial acumen. "I am not routing it into a standard checking account, Thea. I am smarter than that. I am funneling the money directly into the accounts for Sterling Heritage Holdings. It keeps the funds liquid and avoids unnecessary scrutiny. I kept my expression neutral. You are using the LLC I prompted. Helen nodded. Yes, it allows me to manage the family legacy properly. You and Nathan are too emotional right now to make sound fiscal decisions. By housing the donations within the LLC, I can allocate the capital toward our social initiatives, maintain our status at the club, and ensure the family name remains associated with philanthropy. It is wealth management, darling. You should be taking notes. I did not need to take notes. The digital recorder captured every single syllable. She had just confessed on tape to wire fraud, misappropriation of charitable funds, and commingling assets through a shell corporation. She admitted the money was not going toward medical debt or bereavement. It was funding her social climbing. I picked up my phone, slid my thumb across the screen to save the audio file, and dropped the device back into my blazer pocket. The trap was armed. The luncheon began to wind down. Guests started drifting toward the exit. I stood up to collect my coat from the cloakroom. Nathan remained near the table, finishing his coffee. I walked down the carpeted hallway toward the lobby. When I turned back to signal Nathan, I saw Helen intercept him near the archway. She placed a manicured hand on his shoulder. I stopped walking. I stood behind a marble pillar out of their direct line of sight and listened. Helen kept her voice low, but the acoustics of the hallway carried her words. "Nathan," she said, "I wanted to speak with you privately about the life insurance." Nathan stiffened. He looked at her, his face a mask of confusion and disgust. "What life insurance?" he asked. Helen patted his arm. "The policy for Lily. Most comprehensive health plans include a standard bereavement payout for a stillbirth. It is usually a substantial sum." Nathan stared at her, his breathing shallow. He did not answer. Helen pressed on. "Since I have taken on the burden of managing the memorial fund and covering these event costs, it is only fair that you and Thea allocate a percentage of that payout to the LLC. Consider it a reimbursement for my time and effort. We need to keep the foundation capitalized." Nathan stepped back. He removed her hand from his shoulder. He looked at my mother as if she were a toxic spill. "Do not ever speak to me about my daughter again," he said. His voice was a flat, lethal whisper. He turned and walked away from her, striding down the hall toward me. I stepped out from behind the pillar. We locked eyes. We did not need to discuss what had just happened. Helen had not just stolen the spotlight. She had tried to monetize the corpse of her own grandchild. She had cemented her role as a financial predator. I took Nathan's arm. We walked out the glass doors of the country club and into the bright Colorado sunlight. My pocket held the audio recording. My encrypted drive at home held the bank routing proofs and the photographs of the stolen nursery furniture. Helen thought she had secured her legacy today. She did not realize she had just provided the verbal confession for her own ruin. The morning after the country club luncheon, I sat in my home office with a cup of black coffee. The house was quiet. Nathan had returned to his architectural firm for a half day, needing the distraction of blueprints and drafting tables. I remained in my sanctuary of dual monitors and encrypted hard drives. My cell phone vibrated against the desk. It was not a text message. It was an automated secure email alert from the Denver General Hospital patient portal. "I know the architecture of this specific software system. I have audited it. I understand the triggers that generate these automated warnings." The subject line read, "Notice of Medical Record Request." My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I clicked the secure link and entered my authentication credentials. The screen populated with a detailed log. Someone had requested the full release of my postpartum medical charts and Lily's neonatal autopsy reports. The requester was listed as Helen Sterling. My mother had tried to breach my sealed medical history. The hospital compliance algorithm had initially flagged and blocked the inquiry. Standard protocol dictates that next of kin cannot access restricted files without explicit written consent from the patient. Helen was denied. But the log showed a secondary entry, time-stamped 12 hours later. An external document had been faxed to the records department to override the denial. I picked up my phone and dialed the direct extension for the hospital compliance director. I did not use the main patient hotline. I used the internal directory. The director answered on the second ring. I identified myself, provided my professional credentials, and verified my patient identification number. I requested a digital copy of the secondary document uploaded to my file. The director hesitated. She noted that the paperwork looked highly irregular. I kept my voice steady and professional. I informed her that I suspected a severe HIPAA violation and needed to review the submission before escalating the matter to their legal department. 10 seconds later, a PDF file arrived in my secure inbox. I opened the attachment. It was a standard medical information release authorization form. I stared at the screen. The printed name at the top of the form was mine. The patient date of birth was correct. The Social Security number was accurate. Helen had memorized those details years ago. My eyes tracked down to the bottom of the digital page. There was a signature sitting on the authorization line. It was supposed to be mine. To an untrained eye, the cursive letters might pass a casual glance. To an auditor, it was a glaring fabrication. A genuine signature flows with fluid, continuous momentum. The pen pressure varies naturally with the speed of the hand. The signature on this fax was rigid. The ink weight was uniform, indicating a slow, deliberate movement. There were microscopic hesitations at the peak of the capital letters. It was a sloppy tracing. Helen had likely laid a piece of tracing paper over an old birthday card or a discarded bank slip. Below the forged signature sat the witness verification line. A witness is legally required to confirm the identity of the signer. The signature in that box was dashed off in a hurried, authentic scrawl. The printed name beneath it read, David Cole. David is Olivia's husband. He is a weak-willed regional sales manager who treats confrontation like a physical allergy. He nods when Olivia speaks and signs whatever Helen places in front of him. By putting his pen to this paper, David had actively participated in identity theft. I clicked the print icon. The laser printer in the corner of my office hummed and spat out a crisp white sheet of paper. I picked it up. I walked out of the office and down the hallway to the kitchen. I did not turn on the overhead lights. The morning sun filtered through the blinds, casting long gray shadows across the floor. I slid down the front of the oak cabinets until I was sitting on the cold ceramic tile. I laid the printed forgery on the floor in front of me. I extended my index finger. I traced the rigid, hesitant loops of the fake signature. This was the precise moment the final thread snapped. Children are conditioned to seek maternal affection. We spend decades ignoring the sharp edges of our mothers, hoping that beneath the vanity and the narcissism, a protective instinct exists. Sitting on that cold kitchen floor, tracing the stolen letters of my own name, that hope died. It did not die with a scream. It died with a quiet, hollow exhalation. Helen did not just want the spotlight. She wanted ownership of my trauma. She viewed my medical autonomy as an inconvenient obstacle to her public relations campaign. She was willing to forge my identity and drag her son-in-law into a criminal conspiracy just to access the clinical details of my tragedy. I stood up. My knees popped in the quiet kitchen. I walked back to my office. I picked up the phone and dialed the Denver General Legal Department. I spoke with the senior risk management attorney. I informed him that the HIPAA authorization form submitted under my name was a fraudulent document. I provided a verbal, sworn statement that I had never signed the release and that the witness listed was complicit in the forgery. I instructed the attorney to lock my medical records behind an alphanumeric passcode that only I possessed. The attorney sounded alarmed. He assured me the hospital would halt all record transfers and flag Helen Sterling in their security database. The breach was sealed. The forgery was now an official, documented incident logged in the hospital legal system. I set the phone back on the desk. A moment later, the screen illuminated. An incoming call from Helen. I did not answer. I watched the caller identification pulse on the glass surface. The phone stopped ringing. A notification icon appeared indicating a new voicemail. I tapped the icon and put the phone on speaker. "Thea, pick up the phone," Helen demanded. Her voice filled the quiet office. She sounded breathless and intensely irritated. "I am trying to finalize the details for the foundation rollout, and the clerks at your hospital are being impossibly stubborn. They are refusing to process the paperwork we sent over." There was a pause on the recording. I could hear the faint sound of a turn signal clicking in the background. Helen was driving. "I need you to call the records department right now and tell them to release the files to me," she continued. The donors at the luncheon were very generous, but a few of the larger benefactors on the club board are asking for specifics. They want to know where their money is going. I need to prove to them that the baby had severe genetic anomalies. I need the autopsy report to show them that this was an unpreventable tragedy. It validates the narrative, Thea. It makes the charity legitimate. Fix this hospital issue immediately so we can move forward. The recording ended with a sharp beep. I stared at the dark screen of my phone. The audacity of her demand hung in the air. Helen was frustrated that her felony had encountered administrative friction. She possessed no concept of boundaries, legal or moral. She needed my medical files to construct a fictitious genetic disaster. She wanted to parade the clinical details of my stillborn daughter in front of wealthy country club members to justify her stolen donations. She referred to my dead child as a narrative. My daughter was not a narrative. Lily was a person. I connected my phone to the computer tower using a data cable. I exported the voicemail audio file directly to my hard drive. I opened the encrypted directory. I clicked on the red folder the digital vault designated for wire fraud and criminal activity. I dragged the audio file into the folder. It settled right next to the recording from the country club luncheon and the PDF of the forged HIPAA release. Helen thought she was operating a sophisticated social campaign. She did not realize she was leaving a permanent trail of federal and state offenses. Forging a medical release to bypass a healthcare privacy barrier is a serious crime. Doing it to perpetuate financial fraud elevates the severity. I had her signature tracing. I had her son-in-law documented as a conspirator. I had her own voice complaining about the failure of her forgery. I closed the red folder. My focus shifted. Helen had failed to secure the medical records, which meant her donors were starting to ask questions. She needed a new strategy to control the story. If she could not prove the genetic anomaly lie with hospital paperwork, she would try to prove it through social engineering. She would seek out a softer target to spread her poison. She would go after the one flank she thought might be vulnerable to her manipulation. She would go after Nathan's family. The administrative wall I built around my medical records held firm. Helen thrives on momentum, and depriving her of it forced her to change tactics. A predator denied a direct route will always circle the perimeter, looking for an unlocked gate. My mother found her alternate entry point 2 days later. She bypassed me entirely and targeted the periphery. Nathan stood in our kitchen that evening preparing dinner. The rhythmic sound of his chef knife hitting the cutting board brought a small measure of order to the house. The scent of roasting garlic and olive oil filled the air, a stark contrast to the sterile hospital odors that still lingered in my memory. I sat at the island counter reviewing a client compliance file on my tablet. We were finding a quiet, functional rhythm. Nathan's cell phone buzzed on the granite countertop. The caller identification displayed his mother's name. Thomas and Martha Nathan's parents reside in a quiet suburb of Colorado Springs. They are traditional, conservative people who value stoicism and family cohesion above all else. They attend church every Sunday and believe deeply in traditional gender roles. When Nathan married a woman who routinely worked 60-hour weeks auditing corporate healthcare fraud, they struggled to understand my ambition. They were polite, but the generational divide was evident. Helen knew this. She understood their specific vulnerabilities. Nathan wiped his hands on a towel and answered the call. "Hey, Mom," he said, his tone light. The light vanished in less than 10 seconds. I watched my husband's shoulders go rigid. The casual posture evaporated. He set the kitchen towel down on the counter with deliberate, frightening care. He did not speak. He just listened. Through the receiver, I could hear the tinny, distressed pitch of Martha's voice. She sounded upset, her words tumbling over each other in an anxious rush. Nathan looked across the kitchen island at me. His eyes were dark. "Mom, stop," Nathan said. His voice dropped an octave. It bypassed anger and settled into a cold, lethal register. "Tell me exactly what Helen said to you." He put the phone on speaker and set it on the granite. Martha sniffled. "She called about an hour ago," Martha explained, her voice trembling. "She said she was seeking prayer warriors for Thea. She told us she was worried about Thea's mental state. Then, she said, the doctors warned Thea to slow down during the 3rd trimester, but Thea refused. Helen said Thea's reckless lifestyle and her obsession with her auditing career caused too much stress. She implied the stillbirth happened because Thea prioritized her job over the baby." The kitchen went dead silent. The knife rested on the cutting board. The stove burner hummed. Helen had weaponized a tragedy and aimed it directly at my character. She knew Thomas and Martha already harbored mild reservations about my demanding career. She exploited that tiny fracture, attempting to drive a permanent wedge between me and my in-laws. If she could convince them I was a negligent mother, she could isolate me. She wanted Nathan to doubt me. She wanted to be the only supportive pillar left standing. I did not cry. I felt the familiar, icy calm of an investigation solidifying. I looked at Nathan. He leaned over the speaker. His jaw was set like carved stone. "Mom, listen to me very carefully," Nathan said. His tone brooked no interruption. "Every single word Helen just told you is a calculated, fabricated lie. Thea's doctors never issued any such warning. The autopsy confirmed the stillbirth was a cord accident. It was unpreventable. Thea did nothing wrong. She is the strongest person I have ever known." Martha drew a shaky breath. "But Helen sounded so devastated, Nathan. She was weeping. Why would a mother say those things if they were not true?" "Because Helen is running a fraud scheme," Nathan replied, his voice slicing through the static. "She is using our daughter's death to collect unrecorded donations from her country club friends. Thea locked her out of the medical files to stop her, and now Helen is retaliating. She is trying to poison you against my wife." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. The conservative, traditional worldview of Nathan's parents did not easily accommodate the concept of a sociopathic matriarch, but they trusted their son. "I am so sorry," Martha whispered. "We just did not know what to think. We love Thea. We would never want to add to her pain." "I know, Mom," Nathan said, his voice softening just a fraction. "But you cannot speak to Helen again. If she calls, you disconnect. If she texts you, delete it. I am permanently banning her from contacting this family. You will block her number tonight. Do you understand?" "Yes," Martha said firmly. "I will tell your father right now. We love you both." Nathan ended the call. He picked up the chef knife, walked to the sink, and dropped it into the stainless steel basin. He turned around and leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. We looked at each other. Helen had tried to ignite a fire inside our marriage. Instead, she had forged us into an impenetrable front. My husband did not hesitate. He did not ask me to explain or defend myself. He stood in the breach and dismantled the smear campaign before it could even take root. The minor conflict of his parents' doubt was quashed instantly by his fierce, unwavering loyalty. "She is escalating," Nathan stated. "She is losing control," I corrected. "She failed to get the medical records. She failed to turn your parents against me. Her avenues of manipulation are shrinking. Predators despise a shrinking perimeter. When covert tactics fail, they return to the environment where they wield the most power. For Helen, that environment was the public stage. She needed an audience. She needed to reinforce her narrative in front of the people who held the checkbooks. 2 hours later, my phone lit up with a notification. It was not a text from an individual number. It was an automated digital delivery from a premium event management service. I opened the application. A formal, elegant invitation appeared on the screen. The background featured tasteful watercolor lilies. The elaborate script read, "You are cordially invited to a celebration of life honoring Lily Grace Bennett." I scanned the details. The host was listed exclusively as Helen Sterling. My name and Nathan's name were nowhere on the host registry. The venue was the grand ballroom of the Cherry Creek Country Club. The date was set for the upcoming Saturday. The attire was listed as respectful mourning. At the bottom of the invitation, a subtle hyperlink read, "In lieu of flowers, please consider a contribution to the Lilly Memorial Foundation." I tapped the link. It redirected straight to the fraudulent crowdfunding page that funneled into Her Shell LLC. Helen was throwing an extravagant gala. She was inviting her entire social registry. She was framing it as a solemn tribute to her granddaughter, but it was nothing more than a high-gloss fundraising summit. She was daring me to intervene. If I declined the invitation, she would stand at the podium and tell 200 wealthy donors that my grief had rendered me incapable of attending. She would play the valiant, suffering grandmother, stepping up to honor the child her fragile daughter could not bear to remember. The donations would pour in. Her reputation would be cemented. If I attended and caused a scene without evidence, she would use it as proof of my mental instability. She would have me escorted out, validating the exact lie she had tried to feed Nathan's mother. Nathan read the invitation over my shoulder. He let out a harsh, bitter breath. "We are not going," he said. "I will call the club manager tomorrow and threaten a lawsuit if they host an event using my daughter's name." I locked the screen of my phone. I placed it face down on the granite island. The tactical map unrolled in my mind. Threatening the club would only delay the inevitable. Helen would just move the venue. She would spin the cancellation as my cruel attempt to stifle her mourning process. Shutting down the event would not expose the fraud. It would only hide it. An auditor knows that the best place to trap a thief is inside their own ledger. "We are going," I told Nathan. My voice was calm, anchored by the weight of the data I had spent the week compiling. He stared at me, his brow furrowed. "You want to sit in a ballroom and watch her profit off our child?" "I want her in a room full of her peers," I replied. "I want her standing in front of every single person she relies on for social status and financial leverage. She is building a stage, Nathan. She thinks it is her sanctuary." I picked up my tablet and opened the encrypted directory. The yellow folder held the theft of the nursery. The red folder held the wire fraud, the forged medical release, and the audio confession. I looked at the files. The arsenal was complete. "I am not going to mourn," I said, meeting my husband's eyes. "I am going to use her own event as the snare. She wants an audience. I am going to give her an execution." The transition from daughter to auditor required a complete psychological shift. I stopped looking at Helen as a maternal figure who had failed me and began treating her as a hostile vendor undergoing a mandatory forensic review. When an entity attempts to defraud an institution, compliance officers do not rely on emotional appeals or heated arguments. They rely on the unyielding weight of paper trails. They build a brief that cannot be dismissed, ignored, or reframed. I spent the next 3 days barricaded in my home office, turning my professional skills inward to dissect my own family history. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I cross-referenced state corporate registries with public tax disclosures. I dug past the glamorous surface of Helen's exclusive social club, diving deep into municipal filings and property records. That is when I uncovered the structural rot beneath her pristine social standing. The Cherry Creek Social Club was not a registered nonprofit entity, as she claimed to all her wealthy members. It was a dissolved domestic corporation whose charter had been revoked by the state 5 years prior for failing to file annual reports. Helen had been operating an unregistered shadow entity under the guise of an elite philanthropic foundation, collecting dues and event fees with zero oversight. The grift extended far beyond a revoked charter. Digging deeper into historical local news archives and family legal notices, I found a disturbing pattern of financial exploitation. 5 years ago, a distant cousin named Arthur suffered a severe form of bone cancer and required expensive experimental treatments. Helen had stepped forward, appointed herself as the head of a community benevolence committee, and launched a massive regional fundraising campaign. She raised over $50,000 in cash and checks from local church members and neighborhood associations. When the dust settled, She handed Arthur a check for $20,000 to cover his medical bills, quietly pocketing the remaining $30,000 under the heading of administrative management fees. She kept 60% of a dying man's charity drive for herself and called it operational overhead. The template of her corruption was consistent. She identified a tragedy, inserted herself as the grieving gatekeeper, routed the capital through a fabricated structure, and siphoned the proceeds to fund her luxurious lifestyle. She had spent decades perfecting this playbook because nobody in her social circle ever asked to see the ledger. They trusted the pearls, the tailored blazers, and the practiced tears. They did not understand that con artists rely entirely on the polite reluctance of polite society to question an authority figure. I compiled every single piece of evidence into a cohesive, unassailable dossier. I printed the state tax revocation certificates for the social club. I printed the public banking disclosures and the GoFundMe terms of service, highlighting the exact clauses prohibiting the creation of shell LLCs for unverified fundraisers. I printed the hospital compliance log and the side-by-side comparison of the forged HIPAA release, clearly marking the clumsy signature tracing. I carried the stack of documents to the kitchen island, opened a heavy black leather 3-ring binder, and systematically inserted each page into clear plastic sheet protectors. The physical snap of the metal rings clicking shut echoed loudly in the quiet kitchen. It was a sharp, mechanical sound. To anyone else, it was just office supply noise. To me, it was the sound of competence turning into armor. Every document was a bulletproof barrier between my trauma and my mother's manipulations. I slid the black binder into my leather briefcase and snapped the brass latches closed. To ensure my delivery remained clinical and devastating, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror and rehearsed my presentation. I stripped all inflection, all hesitation, and all trace of emotional trauma from my voice. When an auditor presents findings to a board of directors, they do not yell. They state the facts with flat, terrifying precision, letting the gravity of the data do the heavy lifting. I practiced reading the wire fraud statutes and the state penalties for medical identity theft until my tone matched the cold, measured hum of an automated system. Midway through my preparation, my cell phone rang, vibrating aggressively against the marble countertop. I looked at the caller identification display. It was Olivia. I let it ring twice, letting the electronic pulse steady my breathing, before I swiped the screen and brought the phone to my ear. I did not speak first. I waited, letting the dead air stretch across the connection. Thea, Olivia's voice chimed through the speaker, carrying a nervous, forced brightness. "Are you coming to the Saturday celebration at the club? Mom says you have been acting very strange lately, and everyone is wondering if you are going to make a scene." I kept my voice completely flat, utilizing monosyllabic, polite indifference. "Yes." There was a brief pause on the line. Olivia had clearly prepared a script designed to provoke an emotional counterattack, expecting me to snap, defend myself, or scream about the stolen nursery furniture. My absolute lack of reactivity threw her completely off balance. Well, Olivia stammered, her cheerful facade wobbling dangerously. "Mom just wants everything to be respectful. She has invited half the city council, and the local news crew is doing a small segment on the foundation. We just need to know you are going to behave appropriately and support the family publicly." "I am attending," I said quietly. Olivia let out an irritated breath. "Is that all you are going to say? You are being completely opaque, Thea. It is honestly creepy how quiet you have been since you came home from the hospital. Everyone thinks you are hiding something." "I am not hiding anything, Olivia. I am simply preparing." "Preparing for what?" Olivia snapped, her paranoia spiking as she realized she could not read my baseline. "Preparing to ruin Mom's day. Because if you try to pull any of your weird auditing stunts or complain about stupid things like furniture, you are going to look like an unhinged lunatic in front of the entire town." I did not take the bait. I did not mention the mahogany crib sitting in her basement. I did not mention the GoFundMe subpoena I was preparing to file. I simply offered a neutral, polite deflection. "You will see everything on Saturday, Olivia. Have a pleasant afternoon." I ended the call before she could sputter another word. I dropped the phone onto the counter. Olivia's reaction was entirely predictable. By refusing to engage in her emotional warfare, I had plunged her into a spiral of suspicion. She would run straight to Helen and report that I was acting cold, calm, and unreachable. Helen, in turn, would assume I was broken, retreating further into her own hubris because she could not fathom a scenario where a victim quietly bypasses shouting and heads straight for a legal subpoena. The battlefield was fully primed for the public arena. Helen believed she was orchestrating a magnificent theatrical triumph to cement her legacy and line her pockets with illicit donations. She had the stage, the catering, the news cameras, and an audience full of wealthy, gullible benefactors. She had the illusion of absolute control. I had the data. I had the black leather binder resting quietly in my briefcase, containing every single routing number, tax violation, and criminal confession she had carelessly generated over the last month. The illusion was about to collide with reality, and when it did, there would be nowhere left for the matriarch to run. 2 days before the country club memorial, the atmospheric pressure inside the hostile camp began to fracture. Fraud is a fragile ecosystem. It relies on unanimous silence and shared delusion. When you isolate a corrupt network and starve it of the emotional reactions it needs to survive, the weakest links buckle under the strain. My sister Olivia was the weakest link. On Thursday afternoon, the sky over Denver turned a bruised charcoal gray, threatening an early evening storm. I sat at my kitchen island reviewing the final printed pages of my black leather binder. The doorbell chimed. The sharp sound cut through the quiet house. I slid the documents under a manila folder, walked to the entryway, and pulled the heavy oak door open. Olivia stood on my front porch. She did not look like the radiant, expectant mother who had hijacked the country club luncheon a few days prior. Her posture was crumpled. Tears streaked her foundation, leaving jagged lines down her cheeks. She clutched a designer leather handbag to her chest like a shield. She wore a tailored high-end maternity dress woven from imported silk. I recognized the brand. It retailed for over $900. She purchased it using the stolen sympathy funds routed through Helen's shell company. The Olivia choked out her voice, a ragged, wet whisper. "I need to come inside. Please." I did not step aside. I kept my hand on the brass doorknob, filling the threshold. My face remained a blank, unreadable slate. "What do you want, Olivia?" I asked. Olivia let out a sob, wrapping her arms around her stomach. "David is leaving me," she wept. "He packed a suitcase an hour ago. He went to stay at a hotel near the interstate. You have to help me fix this." I stood perfectly still. David is her husband. He is the regional sales manager who avoids conflict at all costs. He is also the man who signed his name on the witness line of a forged medical release form. I felt no pity for him, but I noted the tactical shift. "Why did David pack a suitcase?" I inquired. My tone was clinical, mirroring a doctor assessing a self-inflicted wound. Olivia looked down at her expensive suede boots. She sniffled, wiping her nose with the back of her wrist. "He went into the basement to look for his golf clubs," she confessed. "I told him not to go down there. I told him it was a mess, but he did not listen. He moved the winter coats. He found the crib. He found the stroller. The stolen nursery furniture. The mahogany crib and the leather-handled stroller that she and Helen had stripped from my home while I was recovering from a stillbirth. He recognized them." Olivia continued, her words tumbling out in a frantic rush. "He knew they belonged to you and Nathan. He asked me why we had them. I panicked. I told him I bought them secondhand online, but he did not believe me. He called me a monster. He said he could not stay married to a woman who would steal from her own grieving sister. He said he was going to call Nathan and confess everything." Olivia reached out, attempting to grab my wrist. I stepped back, letting her hand grasp empty air. She stumbled slightly, her face twisting in desperate self-pity. "You have to call him, Thea," Olivia begged. "You have to tell him you gave them to me. Tell him it was a gift. Tell him you asked me to take the furniture because looking at it was causing you too much pain. If you validate the story, he will come back. He will forgive me. You have to save my marriage." The audacity of the request hung in the humid air between us. She stood on my porch, draped in clothing bought with fraudulent bereavement money, demanding that I retroactively authorize the theft of my dead daughter's belongings to protect her from the consequences of her own greed. She wanted me to lie to the one person in her orbit who still possessed a functional moral compass. She viewed my tragedy as an inconvenience, but she viewed her own marital dispute as an emergency, requiring my immediate intervention. I looked at the imported silk maternity dress. I looked at the smeared mascara and the trembling hands. I saw the exact replica of Helen standing before me. A woman who believed the truth was a flexible commodity designed to serve her comfort. "I do not audit lies, Olivia," I said. My voice was a flat, lethal monotone. "I just report them." Olivia gasped, her eyes widening in genuine shock. She expected family loyalty. She expected the systemic, ingrained habit of covering up the ugly parts of our lineage to keep the peace. "You cannot do this to me," she cried, her tone shifting from pleading to accusatory. "I am your sister. I am pregnant." "You are a thief," I corrected. "You and Helen looted my home. You kept the spoils in your basement." David is experiencing a rare moment of clarity. I will not steal that from him. "Do not come to this house ever again." I stepped back and pushed the heavy oak door forward. It latched with a solid, definitive click, severing her pleas from my reality. I turned the deadbolt and walked away, leaving her weeping on the concrete steps. I returned to my home office. The air inside the room felt crisp and ordered. My computer monitor illuminated, displaying a new encrypted email notification. The sender was the senior risk management attorney at Denver General Hospital. I opened the message. The text was brief and highly professional. It confirmed that the internal investigation regarding the unauthorized access attempt on my medical files had concluded. Attached to the email was a multi-page PDF document. I downloaded the file and opened it. It was the forged HIPAA release form, now bearing the official watermarks of the hospital's legal department. A secondary page contained a sworn affidavit from the records clerk, who received the fax, tracing the transmission origin directly back to Helen's home office machine. The attorney stated in the email body that the legal department was prepared to hand the entire file over to the local district attorney for criminal prosecution the moment I gave the authorization. The trap was now mathematically perfect. Helen's forged signature and David's complicit witness verification were locked into a chain of custody. The hospital was ready to press felony charges. Helen believed she was untouchable, operating a flawless social grift. She had no idea she was currently trapped in a crosshairs constructed by a major metropolitan healthcare system. I printed the watermarked documents. The warm paper slid from the printer tray. I placed the pages into clear plastic sleeves and snapped them into the back of my black leather binder. My cell phone buzzed on the desk. A text message from Helen appeared on the screen. "Thea, darling," the message read, "I just want to remind you about the dress code for Saturday. Please stick to dark, muted colors. We have several important club board members attending, and the local news affiliate is sending a camera crew to cover the foundation launch. We need to present a unified, respectful front. I am counting on you." I read the words. She was micromanaging the optics of her own fraud, ensuring her tragic prop arrived in the correct costume. She wanted a unified front. She wanted me silent, compliant, and decorative. I picked up the phone. I did not type a long response. I did not mention Olivia crying on my porch. I did not mention the watermarked felony evidence resting on my desk. I typed a single, precise sentence. "I will be bringing everything that matters." I pressed send. I locked the screen and set the device down. The atmospheric pressure had shattered Olivia, but Helen remained entirely oblivious to the storm bearing down on her. Saturday was only 48 hours away. The preparation phase was over. It was time to execute the audit. Saturday morning arrived with unseasonable warmth. The Colorado sun baked the pavement as Nathan and I navigated the residential streets toward the Cherry Creek Country Club. I did not wear traditional morning black. Black is a color of surrender. Black signifies a retreat into the shadows. I wore a tailored slate gray business suit. It featured sharp lapels and a structured silhouette. It was the exact attire I wore when delivering compliance findings to a hostile board of directors. Nathan wore a dark charcoal suit, his tie perfectly knotted. We looked like a legal defense team arriving at a deposition. The valet took our car. We walked up the sweeping stone steps. The heavy brass doors opened, and the scent of Casablanca lilies hit me like a physical wall. The grand ballroom was entirely transformed. It did not resemble a venue for a family to share quiet condolences. It looked like a high-end corporate gala. Towering floral arrangements anchored every table. Exotic orchids and white roses cascaded down crystal vases. My brain automatically tabulated the vendor costs. Those centerpieces alone retailed for thousands of dollars. The money stolen from sympathetic neighbors and distant relatives had been diverted to fund this grotesque botanical display. Over 100 guests filled the room. Waitstaff navigated the crowd carrying silver trays of sparkling water and imported hors d'oeuvres. A low, convivial hum of networking echoed off the vaulted ceilings. People exchanged business cards. They laughed. They clinked glasses. Helen had orchestrated a summit for the local elite, using the corpse of her granddaughter as the admission ticket. We located the reserved seating near the front of the stage. Nathan pulled out my chair. We sat down in unison. We did not speak to the people beside us. We simply watched. Helen stood near the edge of the elevated platform, surrounded by a small cluster of club board members. She wore an immaculate pearl-colored dress coat. She held a pristine white linen handkerchief, occasionally pressing it to her dry eyes whenever someone offered their sympathies. A few feet away, a local news affiliate had positioned a camera tripod. A reporter in a bright red blazer reviewed her notes. Helen had alerted the media. She needed the broadcast to legitimize her shadow corporation. It was a calculated risk. Fraud thrives in darkness, but a narcissist requires a spotlight. Helen believed her performance was flawless enough to withstand a broadcast lens. She assumed her social armor made her immune to scrutiny. Olivia sat 3 chairs down from me. She looked entirely diminished. The imported silk maternity dress from Thursday was replaced by a shapeless dark sweater. Her eyes were swollen. David was notably absent. The vacant chair beside her spoke volumes. Helen had forced her to attend, demanding a unified front, ignoring the fact that her younger daughter's marriage was currently disintegrating. Olivia stared at her lap, terrified of drawing attention, trapped in the machinery of our mother's ambition. The ballroom lights dimmed. A soft spotlight illuminated the podium. Helen ascended the steps with practiced grace. She adjusted the microphone, letting a heavy theatrical silence blanket the room. The networking chatter faded. All eyes turned toward the stage. The news camera rotated, the red recording light blinking to life. "Thank you," Helen began. Her voice resonated through the premium audio-visual system, thick with manufactured emotion. "Thank you for gathering here today. We are surrounded by so much love, so much community. Losing Lily broke our hearts. It tested our faith. But looking out at all of you, I see the power of healing. I see the light pushing back the dark." The audience murmured in collective sympathy. Helen paused, letting the sentiment settle. She wiped a non-existent tear from her cheek. She was a master of pacing. She knew exactly when to transition from the tragic prologue to the financial pitch. Healing requires action. Helen continued, her tone shifting to an uplifting cadence. It requires us to turn our pain into a legacy. That is why I formed the Lily Foundation. We want to ensure that families facing similar tragedies have the resources they need. And today I am honored to welcome City Councilman Marcus Thorne to the stage to help us officially launch this mission. A tall man in a tailored blue suit walked onto the stage. He carried a giant, oversized novelty check made of stiff cardboard. The audience erupted into polite applause. The councilman handed the prop to Helen. They posed together for the cameras. The news photographer snapped a rapid series of pictures. The flashbulbs illuminated the text printed across the cardboard. The check was made out to the Lily Foundation. The amount was written in bold, unmistakable numbers. $20,000. I stared at the oversized prop. The sheer audacity of the presentation was staggering. The $20,000 did not come from the councilman. It did not come from a municipal grant. It came directly from the GoFundMe campaign. It was the exact sum Helen had crowdsourced using my face and my medical tragedy. She had printed a novelty check using the stolen funds, brought a politician on stage to hand it back to her, and framed it as a municipal victory. It was a closed-loop money laundering scheme performed as a photo opportunity. The politician offered a brief, generic speech about community resilience. He exited the stage. Helen returned to the center of the podium. She held the microphone with both hands. The time had come for the emotional climax of her event. She needed to present the grieving mother to validate the charity. She needed me to stand in front of the flashing cameras, weep into the microphone, and thank her for her incredible generosity. She needed the prop to complete the illusion. Helen looked down at the front row. Her gaze locked onto mine. She offered a brave, trembling smile. "There is one person here whose strength inspires me every single day," Helen said. The room grew silent. The reporter leaned forward. "My beautiful daughter, Thea. Thea, darling, would you come up here? Would you say a few words of gratitude to the people who have supported us?" The audience turned their heads. Over 100 pairs of eyes focused on my chair. They expected to see a fragile, broken woman draped in black. They expected to see a mother leaning heavily on her husband, struggling to formulate a coherent sentence through her sorrow. I did not weep. I did not hesitate. I reached down to the floor beside my chair. I picked up the heavy black leather binder. The brass rings shifted inside with a solid, metallic clink. Nathan remained seated. He did not offer his arm. He knew I did not require physical support. He sat tall, his posture telegraphing absolute alignment with what was about to happen. I stood up. I smoothed the lapels of my slate gray suit. I gripped the spine of the binder. I bypassed the stairs and walked up the side ramp to the elevated stage. My heels clicked against the polished hardwood in a steady, even rhythm. The silence in the ballroom shifted from sympathetic to uncertain. The energy changed. I did not look like a grieving daughter. I looked like an executioner arriving for an appointment. I reached the podium. Helen stepped back, gesturing toward the microphone with an open hand. Her smile remained fixed in place, but a subtle tension tightened the corners of her mouth. She noticed the binder. She noticed the suit. She noticed the total absence of tears. I placed the black leather binder onto the wooden surface of the podium. I flipped the heavy cover open. The plastic sheet protectors gleamed under the stage lights. I adjusted the neck of the microphone, bringing it closer to my mouth. I looked out at the sea of expectant faces, the flashing cameras, and the extravagant floral arrangements purchased with my stolen grief. I took a slow, deep breath, preparing to read the ledger. I stood at the wooden podium. The microphone feedback gave a brief, high-pitched whine before settling into a low, steady hum. I looked out at the sea of expectant faces. I saw local politicians, wealthy real estate developers, and country club board members. I saw my Aunt Barbara clutching a linen napkin. I did not see a single person who actually knew the middle name I had chosen for my daughter. They were here for a show. I decided to give them a seminar. "Thank you, Helen," I said. My voice was crisp and amplified. It echoed off the vaulted ceilings of the banquet hall. "I appreciate the incredible effort you have put into this fundraising campaign. It takes a very specific type of dedication to organize a financial drive of this magnitude." I opened the black leather binder. The heavy pages lay flat against the wood. I looked at the first plastic sleeve. "Let us review the accounting for the Lilly Foundation," I continued. I pulled a sheet of paper from the binder. I held it up for the front rows to see. As many of you know, Helen has raised over $20,000 online. You just saw the novelty check. It is a beautiful prop. However, it is vital to understand where your generous donations are actually resting. The Lilly Foundation is not a registered charitable organization in the state of Colorado. It holds no tax-exempt status. It does not legally exist. I read the exact routing and account numbers printed on the bank documents. I explained that the digital transfers were filtering directly into a limited liability company called Sterling Heritage Holdings. I explained that Helen Sterling was the sole proprietor. I noted that the operating address for the company was the very country club where they were currently eating catered salads. "Your money is not paying for medical debt," I told the crowd. "My husband and I have zero medical debt. Your money is funding a personal vacation account and paying for these lavish floral arrangements." The reaction in the room was not immediate chaos. It was a profound, suffocating paralysis. A few seconds prior, the banquet hall echoed with the ambient noise of 100 people eating and conversing. Now the sound of silverware clinking against porcelain ground to an absolute halt. The silence was heavier than any shout. The entire room stopped breathing simultaneously. Wealthy individuals tolerate many flaws, but they do not tolerate being scammed in public. I did not pause to let them recover. An auditor maintains the momentum of the evidence. Before the luncheon began, I had instructed the audio-visual technician to connect my encrypted tablet to the main overhead projector. I tapped the screen mounted on the podium. Behind me, a digital display flickered to life. A high-resolution image of a document filled the screen, towering 20 feet tall above the stage. "This is a medical release authorization form," I stated. My voice remained level, devoid of anger, delivering the facts with clinical detachment. 2 days ago, Helen attempted to access my sealed medical charts and my daughter's autopsy reports at Denver General Hospital. When she was denied access by the privacy protocols, she submitted this document. I pointed to the bottom of the projected image. I explained the anatomy of medical identity theft. I described the rigid, hesitant ink flow of a traced signature. I pointed to the witness verification line. I read the name David Cole aloud. I noted that David Cole was Olivia's husband, and he had actively participated in a conspiracy to breach federal healthcare privacy laws. I watched Olivia sink lower into her chair, her face draining of all color as her husband's criminal complicity was broadcast to the entire social registry. Helen finally broke from her frozen state. The polished facade cracked, revealing the frantic, cornered predator underneath. Her face turned a sickly, translucent white. She lunged forward, her high heels catching on the carpeted stage. She reached out her manicured hands, clawing toward the microphone stand. "Turn that off," Helen hissed. Her voice was a venomous, desperate whisper meant only for me. "Turn it off right now. You are having a psychotic break. The grief is making you delusional. We need to get you to a hospital before you embarrass yourself any further." She never reached the microphone. Nathan materialized from the front row. He did not run. He moved with a smooth, terrifying efficiency. He ascended the side steps and stepped directly between my mother and the podium. He did not raise his hands. He did not adopt an aggressive posture. He simply occupied the space. He became a solid, immovable barrier of dark charcoal wool and quiet fury. Helen collided with his chest. She stumbled backward, gasping in shock as if she had struck a brick wall. "Sit down," Helen, Nathan said. His voice was quiet enough that the microphone did not pick it up, but the command carried the weight of a falling anvil. Helen looked at Nathan, her chest heaving. She looked at the giant projection of her forged signature. She looked at the audience. The wealthy benefactors were staring at her with open revulsion. The local politician had already abandoned his seat and was briskly walking toward the exit, desperate to distance himself from a criminal enterprise. Aunt Barbara sat with her mouth open, the crystal flute slipping from her fingers and spilling sparkling wine onto the tablecloth. I looked down at the black binder. I turned the page. I read the formal response from the hospital risk management attorney. I read the exact penal code for wire fraud across state lines. I read the state statutes for grand larceny, specifically referencing the stolen mahogany crib currently sitting in her other daughter's basement. I recited the penalties for each offense in a steady, professional cadence. In less than 3 minutes, I had systematically dismantled a lifetime of Helen's carefully curated social standing. I stripped away the pearls, the charity luncheons, and the maternal martyrdom. I exposed her as a thief, a fraud, and a felon. The audience watched the illusion dissolve into a pile of admissible evidence. I did not need to raise my voice to destroy her. I just needed to read the ledger. But a narcissist facing total annihilation does not apologize. When the truth corners them, they deploy the most toxic weapon remaining in their arsenal. Helen realized she could not debate the financial records. She realized she could not deny the forged signature projected on the wall behind me. Her entire identity was collapsing under the weight of documented reality. So she decided to attack the one thing the audience could not verify with a bank statement. She looked at the wealthy donors turning away in disgust, and she panicked. She needed to regain their sympathy. She needed to make me the villain again. To achieve that, she decided to attack the biological integrity of my dead child. Helen stepped back, her expensive heels wobbling on the carpeted stage. The physical barrier of my husband stood between her and the microphone, but it could not stop her from using her voice. When an illusionist realizes the trap door is jammed, they do not surrender the stage. They attempt to set the entire theater on fire. Helen looked past Nathan. She looked at the faces of the country club board members, the local elites, and the wealthy donors who were currently staring at her with naked revulsion. Her social empire was burning to the foundation. She needed a firebreak. She needed to redirect their horror away from her fraudulent banking practices and focus it on a target that could not be verified by a simple ledger. "She is sick," Helen shouted over Nathan's shoulder. Her voice lost its practiced melodic cadence. It became a shrill, desperate frequency that echoed off the vaulted ceiling. "My daughter is suffering from severe postpartum psychosis. The grief has fractured her mind. She fabricated these documents because she cannot accept the truth about what happened to her child." The ballroom remained silent. The guests did not nod in agreement. They did not whisper among themselves. They stood frozen, captivated by the spectacle of a matriarch unraveling in real time. Helen realized the mental health accusation was not gaining traction. The crowd had just seen a projected forgery of her own handwriting. They needed a more compelling distraction. She pivoted to the ugliest, most toxic weapon she possessed. She decided to attack the biological integrity of the child she had just exploited. Helen has always obsessed over pedigree. She views human bloodlines the way a commodities broker views a stock portfolio. She measures a person by their zip code, their alma mater, and their inherited wealth. Nathan never fit her criteria. He built his architectural firm from the ground up, paying his own tuition and earning his success through relentless labor. He did not possess a trust fund. His parents, Thomas and Martha, lived in a modest suburban home in Colorado Springs. Helen always viewed Nathan as a genetic downgrade for her lineage. Now cornered and desperate, she weaponized that prejudice. She pointed a shaking, manicured finger directly at Nathan. "The charity was not for me," Helen cried out, playing the role of the tragic protector. "It was for them. I was trying to shield this family from the shame. I was trying to build a fund for future medical interventions because that baby was a genetic disaster." A collective sharp intake of breath swept through the banquet hall. Helen pressed her advantage, leaning into the lie. She spun a fabricated tale of chromosomal ruin. She claimed the doctors had warned us early in the pregnancy that the fetus carried severe incompatible defects. She stated that the stillbirth was the inevitable result of Nathan's inferior lineage. She painted herself as the valiant grandmother who took on the burden of fundraising to cover up the biological failure of her daughter's marriage. She said she hid the money in a private corporation to spare my in-laws the humiliation of knowing their son carried a defective bloodline. It was a monstrous, calculated fiction. She was attempting to erase her financial crimes by hiding them behind a wall of fabricated medical trauma. She thought she was safe because medical records are federally protected. She assumed I would never broadcast my clinical history to a room full of strangers. She underestimated the lengths an auditor will go to clear a ledger. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice to interrupt her frantic monologue. I simply reached down to the podium and turned to the final tab in my black leather binder. I tapped the screen of my encrypted tablet. The towering digital projection of the forged HIPAA release vanished. The screen flashed white for a fraction of a second. A new document appeared, illuminating the wall behind the stage. The document bore the official seal of the Denver General Hospital Department of Pathology. The header read, "Final Autopsy and Genetic Screening Report." The signature at the bottom belonged to the Chief of Neonatal Pathology. I leaned into the microphone. My voice cut through Helen's hysterical performance with the cold, unyielding weight of empirical data. "This is the official pathology report for Lily Grace Bennett," I announced. I did not look at Helen. I looked directly at the wealthy donors she had tried to manipulate. "I will read the clinical findings aloud." Helen stopped screaming. She turned her head, looking up at the 20-foot projection of the medical chart. Her face went slack. "Karyotype testing indicates a normal 46XX chromosomal pattern." I read. My enunciation was crisp and deliberate. "There are no trisomies. There are no microdeletions. There are no congenital defects, structural anomalies, or genetic markers for any inherited disease. The organ development is flawless. The genetic sequencing is pristine." I paused, letting the medical terminology settle over the silent ballroom. The facts were stark, undeniable, and signed by a licensed medical examiner. "The cause of death is clearly documented on page 4, I continued. I swiped my tablet. The projection shifted to the final page of the autopsy. "The determination is a true knot in the umbilical cord, resulting in sudden, unpreventable oxygen deprivation in the final moments of gestation. It was a tragic, unpredictable, physical accident. It had nothing to do with genetics. My daughter was perfectly healthy. Her bloodline is flawless." I closed the black leather binder. The sound of the heavy cover hitting the podium echoed like a gavel striking wood. "You did not forge my signature to protect this family from genetic shame, Helen," I said, looking down at her from the podium. "You forged my signature because you needed to invent a tragedy to justify your stolen revenue. You tried to turn my perfect daughter into a clinical disaster so you could play the martyr at a country club." The false narrative shattered. It did not just break, it disintegrated into dust against the immovable weight of signed, dated medical facts. The physical reaction from the crowd was instantaneous. The social elite are highly sensitive to the scent of a sinking ship. A woman standing near the front of the stage, one of Helen's closest tennis partners, took a deliberate step backward. She turned her body away, refusing to make eye contact. The movement triggered a chain reaction. The small cluster of club board members who had been hovering near the stage physically retreated, opening a wide, empty circle around my mother. They treated her like a biohazard. Aunt Barbara stood up from her chair. She dropped her linen napkin onto her half-eaten salad. She grabbed her purse, turned her back on her sister, and walked swiftly toward the exit without uttering a single word. But the most devastating reaction did not come from the wealthy socialites. It came from the second row. Thomas and Martha Nathan's parents had listened to every word Helen said. They heard the woman who had always looked down on them attempt to blame the death of their granddaughter on their family lineage. They heard her call their son inferior. Thomas stood up first. He is a quiet, dignified man who spent 30 years working as a civil engineer. He understands structural integrity, and he understands when a foundation is rotten. He reached out and offered his hand to his wife. Martha stood up beside him. Her face was pale, but her posture was rigid with absolute, unadulterated disgust. They did not yell. They did not stoop to Helen's level of theatrical outrage. Thomas and Martha simply looked at Helen with a profound, freezing contempt. They turned their backs on her in perfect unison. They walked over to the side aisle, distancing themselves from the toxic blast radius of the matriarch. Helen was left standing in the center of an empty circle. The news camera operator had stopped recording, packing up his tripod with frantic speed, eager to escape the liability of the room. Olivia sat slumped in her chair, weeping silently into her hands, entirely abandoned by the mother who had led her into a criminal conspiracy. The illusion was dead. Helen Sterling no longer existed as a respected philanthropist or a tragic grandmother. She was exposed as a predator, stripped of her audience, her influence, and her dignity. But social ruin was only the first phase of the audit. Exposing a fraud terminates the deception, but it does not balance the ledger. Helen had stolen $20,000 from unsuspecting donors. She had stolen $1,200 of nursery furniture. She had committed a federal offense to line her own pockets. I looked down at the woman who had spent my entire life prioritizing her aesthetic over my survival. She was trembling, staring at the empty space where her friends had been standing moments prior. She thought the worst part was over. She thought losing her reputation was the final consequence. She was wrong. The presentation of evidence was complete. It was time to issue the penalties. The projection of the medical examiner's report glowed on the wall above the stage, casting a pale clinical light over the banquet hall. The illusion of the grieving, benevolent grandmother lay shattered on the carpet. The wealthy patrons, the country club board members, and the local politicians stood frozen in a collective, horrified hush. The ice clinked softly as it melted inside abandoned crystal water glasses. The ambient hum of the commercial air conditioning unit filled the soundless void. I stood at the podium, looking down at the wreckage of my mother's social empire. Exposing a lie terminates a deception, but it does not balance a ledger. An auditor knows that identifying a fraudulent transaction is only the first step. True resolution requires restitution. The stolen capital must be reclaimed. The perpetrators must face the specific, calculated consequences of their actions. I watched the matriarch tremble in the center of the room. Her carefully styled hair seemed to droop. The tailored, pearl-colored dress coat hung loosely on her frame. She was breathing in shallow, rapid gasps. For the first time in her pristine, highly curated life, she possessed no narrative control. To her right, a subtle movement caught my attention. Olivia pushed her chair back from the table. The wooden legs scraped harshly against the hardwood floor. She kept her head down, her shoulders hunched inside her dark sweater. My younger sister had spent 31 years existing inside a protective bubble manufactured by our mother. Whenever Olivia failed a class, wrecked a leased vehicle, or broke a neighbor's window, Helen wrote a check to make the problem disappear. Olivia never experienced the sting of accountability. Now facing the terrifying reality of a public reckoning, her instinct was to flee. She turned her body away from the stage. She took a tentative step toward the heavy velvet curtains that concealed the kitchen service exit. She intended to slip out through the back corridors, abandon her mother to the crowd, and drive her imported SUV back to her empty house. She thought she could outwalk her own complicity. She did not make it 3 steps. Nathan possesses the deep, resonant voice of an architect, accustomed to projecting instructions across loud, chaotic construction sites. He understands acoustics. He knows how to fill a large space without resorting to a shout. "Leaving so soon?" Olivia Nathan asked. His voice rolled across the silent ballroom, anchoring every pair of eyes directly onto my sister. Olivia froze mid-stride. Her hand hovered mere inches from the velvet drape. She looked like a thief caught in the beam of a security spotlight. Nathan remained seated in the front row. He unbuttoned his suit jacket and crossed one leg over his knee, projecting total relaxation. "I was just wondering if you needed any assistance loading your vehicle," Nathan continued. His tone was polite, conversational, and laced with pure arsenic. "That mahogany crib is quite heavy. It took me 3 hours to assemble it. The imported leather stroller is cumbersome too. I imagine it was difficult for you to haul both of those items down the stairs into your basement. If you wait a few moments, I would be happy to walk out to the parking lot and help you secure my dead daughter's stolen furniture into your trunk." The remaining color drained from Olivia's face. The humiliation was instantaneous and permanent. The murmurs of disgust from the audience swelled, directed entirely at the pregnant woman cowering near the service doors. The guests had just absorbed the shock of Helen's medical forgery. Now, they were forced to digest the reality that her younger daughter had looted the nursery of a grieving mother. Olivia let out a high, fractured whimper. She dropped her gaze to the floor, paralyzed by the weight of 100 condemning stares. She could not walk through the curtain. She could not return to her seat. She simply stood there, a ruined participant in a shattered conspiracy. I shifted my focus back to the center of the room. I stepped out from behind the wooden podium. I left the black leather dossier resting on the slanted surface. I did not need the paper documents anymore. I had memorized the statutes. I walked to the edge of the elevated stage, closing the physical distance between myself and the woman who gave birth to me. "Helen," I said. She looked up at me. Her eyes were wide, bloodshot, and swimming with unspilled tears. She waited for me to yell. She waited for a dramatic emotional outburst she could somehow use to play the victim one final time. "Let us review the legal realities of your fundraising campaign," I stated. My delivery was cold, measured, and stripped of all familial attachment. I spoke to her as if she were a hostile corporate vendor facing federal indictment. "You forged my signature on a federal healthcare privacy document," I explained, listing the offenses with rhythmic precision. Under state law, falsifying a medical release to gain unauthorized access to protected health information is a Class 5 felony. It carries a mandatory minimum sentence. Helen flinched, taking a small step backward. "Furthermore," I continued, "you utilized a digital crowdfunding platform to solicit donations under false pretenses. You routed those funds across state lines into a fabricated, limited liability company. That meets the exact statutory definition of federal wire fraud. The Federal Bureau of Investigation tends to frown upon utilizing shell corporations to launder sympathy money." I gestured toward the velvet curtains where my sister remained frozen. "And then there is the matter of the nursery equipment," I added. "The combined retail value of the crib and the stroller exceeds $1,200. In this jurisdiction, stealing property valued above that specific threshold elevates the crime from a petty misdemeanor to grand larceny." The guests in the ballroom absorbed the legal briefing. They were wealthy, educated individuals. They understood the severe implications of the words felony wire fraud and grand larceny. They realized they were not just attending a tasteless social event. They were standing in the middle of an active crime scene. "You built a very elaborate stage today," I told my mother, "but you forgot to audit your own exposure. The hospital legal department has the watermarked forgery. I have the digital routing metadata. I have the photographs of the stolen goods. The district attorney will not require a lengthy investigation. They will only require my signature on the formal complaint." Helen began to shake. Her hands trembled at her sides. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Taya, please, I am your mother. You cannot do this to me." I ignored the plea. An auditor does not negotiate with sentiment. The giant cardboard novelty check sitting on the display easel is a worthless prop, I said, pointing to the oversized stage dressing. But the $20,000 sitting in your shadow corporate account is real liquid cash. You collected that capital using my face and my trauma. You are going to disperse it right now." Helen stared at me, confusion mingling with her terror. "Take out your phone," I ordered. She hesitated, her breathing shallow and erratic. I said, "Take out your phone," I repeated, dropping my voice to a lethal, non-negotiable register. Helen reached a shaking hand into her designer purse. She retrieved her smartphone. The screen illuminated her pale, terrified face. "You are going to open your mobile banking application I instructed. You are going to initiate a direct wire transfer. You will empty the entire balance of the Sterling Heritage Holdings account. You will send all $20,000 to the Rocky Mountain Neonatal Research Institute. They are an actual registered hospital division dedicated to preventing stillbirths. They possess a legitimate tax-exempt identification number." "I cannot do that right now," Helen stammered, fresh tears spilling over her eyelashes. "The daily transfer limits will flag the transaction. The bank will place a hold on the funds. You are a premier tier client at that bank." I countered, calling her bluff. "Without missing a beat, your account manager overrides standard transfer limits for your real estate deposits every single month. You know exactly how to push a wire through the security protocol." I raised my left wrist. I looked at the face of my watch. "You have exactly 60 seconds to initiate the transfer and show me the confirmation screen," I announced. Helen opened her mouth to protest, desperate to cling to the stolen capital. "If you do not complete the transaction before the minute expires," I said, leaning forward slightly, "I will pick up my black leather portfolio. I will walk out the front doors of this country club. I will hand the entire collection of evidence directly to the 2 police officers currently idling in a patrol cruiser near the valet stand." It was a lie. There was no police cruiser waiting in the parking lot. I had not called the authorities. But a brilliant bluff relies on the credibility of the person delivering it. I had spent the last 20 minutes presenting flawless, irrefutable documentation. I had displayed watermarked legal forms and recited penal codes from memory. I possessed the cold, unyielding demeanor of a woman who had planned every single detail of this execution. Helen had no reason to doubt the existence of the patrol car. "The timer starts now," I said. The ballroom fell into a stunning, suffocating silence. The wealthy benefactors, the club management, and the remaining family members stood paralyzed. They watched the power dynamic of our family permanently invert. 50 seconds, I stated. Helen sobbed. It was an ugly, guttural sound. She unlocked her phone screen. Her thumbs flew across the digital keyboard, frantically entering her banking credentials. She navigated the menus with desperate, trembling urgency. 40 seconds, I called out. The steady, rhythmic ticking of my watch echoed in my own ears, a metronome marking the final moments of my mother's reign. 30 seconds, I announced. The sound of my voice carried through the hushed ballroom. Helen gasped. Her manicured thumb jabbed at the illuminated glass of her mobile device. She navigated the final authorization prompt. She hit the confirm button. A green checkmark materialized on her screen. She thrust the device forward. Her hand shook so hard the phone nearly slipped from her grip. "It is done," Helen choked out. "The money is gone." I leaned over the wooden podium and inspected the digital receipt. The transaction details were clear. $20,000 routed directly to the Rocky Mountain Neonatal Research Institute. The confirmation code glowed in bright green text. The stolen capital was secured. The tension holding the room hostage finally snapped. The wealthy elite do not linger around failure. They protect their proximity to power and distance themselves from liability. The guests began to move. It was not a chaotic stampede. It was a swift, silent, and highly coordinated retreat. Chairs scraped against the polished hardwood floor. Crystal glasses were set down on linen tablecloths, the ice rattling softly inside. Aunt Barbara had already vanished. The local politicians followed her out the double doors. The country club board members, the very people Helen spent 3 decades courting with expensive gifts and sycophantic praise, turned their backs and walked down the center aisle. They did not offer parting words. They treated my mother like a sudden terminal diagnosis. Helen watched them leave. Her eyes darted from face to face, searching for a single sympathetic glance. She found only averted eyes and accelerating footsteps. Her social registry erased her from their ranks in less than 2 minutes. The club manager stepped out of the shadows near the catering entrance. He was a tall, austere man in a fitted tuxedo. He had catered Helen's holiday parties and summer galas for 15 years. He approached the stage, bypassing the scattered floral arrangements. He did not look at me. He looked directly at Helen. "Mrs. Sterling," the manager said. His tone was polite, firm, and entirely devoid of warmth. "The club president has instructed me to inform you that your membership is suspended, effective immediately. We must ask you to vacate the premises. We will forward your personal belongings from your locker to your home address." Helen stared at him. Her mouth opened and closed without producing a sound. The manager did not wait for a response. He turned on his heel and walked back toward the kitchen doors. The ballroom was empty. The grand event designed to cement her legacy had transformed into a sprawling, vacant tomb. The silence rushing back into the space was deafening. Helen swayed on her feet. Her knees gave out. She collapsed into a velvet-upholstered chair positioned near the back of the stage. The rigid posture she maintained for decades dissolved. Her shoulders caved inward. She bent forward, covering her face with both hands. The tears that followed were not performative. They were not designed for a camera crew or a sympathetic audience. They were raw, ragged sobs of profound defeat. For the first time in her life, Helen was forced to exist in a reality she could not edit. She looked up at me. Mascara stained her cheeks, tracking dark lines through her expensive foundation. She reached a hand out, grasping the air between us. "Thea, please," Helen pleaded, her voice cracking. "You got the money. You made your point. You cannot hand that binder to the police. It will ruin my life. I will go to prison. You have to tell them it was a misunderstanding. You owe me family loyalty." Family loyalty. The phrase hung in the empty room. Helen defined loyalty as a one-way street of endless compliance. She demanded loyalty when she forced me to hide my broken collarbone for a family portrait. She demanded loyalty when she packed away my dead daughter's nursery and called it a favor. She expected me to sacrifice my sanity to maintain her comfort. I did not yell. I did not explain the depth of her delusion. I deployed the ultimate weapon in an auditor's arsenal. I gave her absolute clinical indifference. I stood over her, my hands resting at my sides. I looked at her weeping face. I did not offer a single word. A narcissist feeds on friction. They require an emotional reaction to sustain their narrative. If you scream, they can call you unreasonable. If you cry, they can call you unstable. If you argue, they can manipulate the semantics of the debate. But silence provides no traction. Silence is a vacuum that suffocates their manipulation. I stared at her. The seconds ticked by. The quiet stretched until it became a physical weight pressing down on her shoulders. "Say something," Helen begged, her voice rising in pitch. "Scream at me, call me a monster, just say something to me." I remained entirely mute. My face was a blank, unreadable slate. I watched her squirm under the crushing weight of her own consequences. I let the silence stretch for 2 full minutes. I let her feel the total, irrevocable loss of my attachment. I was no longer her daughter. I was just the mechanism of her ruin. Helen broke under the pressure. She realized the tears were useless. She realized the pleas for maternal loyalty were landing on barren soil. Her hands shook frantically as she picked up her phone from the stage floor. She navigated back to the banking application. She held the illuminated screen up, thrusting it toward my face. "Look," Helen choked out, her voice barely a whisper. "Look at it. The transaction is complete. The balance is 0. I did exactly what you asked. The money is gone." I looked at the digital receipt. The confirmation number was verified. The shell account was drained. The stolen capital was officially secured in the hands of a legitimate medical research institute. I nodded once. The singular, brief motion acknowledged the transaction. It did not offer forgiveness. It merely confirmed the ledger was balanced. I turned away from her and walked back to the wooden podium. The oversized cardboard novelty check rested against the base of the microphone stand. The giant prop bore the words Lilly Foundation and the sum of $20,000 in bold black ink. It was the physical manifestation of her fraudulent pride. I picked up the stiff cardboard rectangle. I gripped the top edge with both hands. I pulled my hands apart in a swift, sharp motion. The thick material resisted for a fraction of a second before giving way. A loud, harsh, tearing sound ripped through the silent ballroom. I tore the prop straight down the middle, separating the fabricated foundation name from the stolen monetary figure. I dropped the 2 jagged halves onto the stage floor. They landed at Helen's feet. I picked up my black leather binder. I snapped the brass latches closed. I walked down the side ramp of the stage, my heels clicking against the hardwood in a steady departing rhythm. Nathan stood waiting for me in the front row. He did not say a word. He extended his right arm. I linked my arm through his. The warmth of his solid presence grounded me. We turned our backs on the stage and walked up the center aisle together. The heavy brass doors of the ballroom loomed ahead of us. We pushed them open, stepping out of the floral-scented tomb and into the bright, clear Colorado afternoon. The sunlight hit my face, warm and unforgiving. Behind us, the heavy doors swung shut, sealing with a final, echoing thud. We left Helen Sterling sitting alone in an empty room, surrounded by abandoned crystal glasses, torn cardboard, and the total wreckage of the life she had destroyed. The parking lot was nearly deserted. The valet brought our car around. Nathan opened the passenger door for me. I slid into the leather seat. I set the heavy black binder on the floorboard. I looked out the window at the manicured lawns of the country club. The battle was over. The fraud was exposed. The funds were recovered. But the story was not finished. The silence I left behind in that ballroom was only the beginning of her punishment, and the peace I was about to find required one final, unexpected adjustment. 6 months passed. The calendar pages turned with a quiet, reliable rhythm. The dust kicked up by the country club confrontation settled into a new, permanent reality. I returned to my remote office. I resumed my compliance reviews. But the most thorough investigation occurring in Denver did not belong to me. It belonged to the Internal Revenue Service. A few days after the ballroom incident, a heavy envelope arrived at the Regional Tax Enforcement Office. It contained a detailed ledger of an unregistered shell corporation named Sterling Heritage Holdings. It included bank routing numbers, crowdfunding metadata, and proof of commingled personal assets. The tip was filed without a return address. Federal tax authorities do not require a dramatic courtroom trial to dismantle a life. They operate with terrifying bureaucratic efficiency. They froze my mother's banking accounts pending a comprehensive review of her entire philanthropic history. They scrutinized every deduction she claimed over the last decade. She lost her country club membership. She lost her social standing. Her wealthy peers treated her name like a contagion, scrubbing her from their contact lists and charity gala invitations. I chose not to hand my black leather binder over to the district attorney. A felony conviction provides a swift, defined punishment. An inmate receives a designated sentence and a release date. I preferred a different outcome. I let her remain free, trapped in the inescapable hell of her own ruined reputation. Helen found herself entirely isolated in her sprawling house, forced to spend her days compiling receipts for federal agents who cared nothing about her tailored blazers or her rehearsed tears. The silence of her former friends became her permanent prison. The collateral damage reached beyond my mother. Fraud requires enablers, and enablers rarely survive the collapse of the primary architect. David filed for divorce 3 weeks after the country club disaster. He could tolerate a passive, spoiled wife, but he could not remain married to a woman who looted a nursery to furnish her own basement. He initiated the separation proceedings and demanded primary custody of their unborn child. He cited Olivia's documented criminal complicity and moral bankruptcy in the court filings. Olivia tried to call me once. She left a voicemail begging for a character reference for her custody hearing. She wanted me to testify that she was simply a victim of our mother's manipulation. She hoped I would offer a lifeline to save her from the wreckage she helped create. I deleted the message before she finished speaking. I do not rescue thieves. I let her face the judge alone, stripped of the financial safety net she always assumed would catch her. She lost her imported luxury vehicle. She lost her pristine suburban home. She was forced to confront the harsh, unyielding mechanics of accountability. The clinical realities of the city faded as autumn arrived. Nathan and I needed a space untouched by ledgers and legal filings. We drove west, leaving the suburban grid behind us. We navigated the winding roads, climbing high into the Rocky Mountains. The air grew thinner, crisp, and carrying the scent of pine needles. We found a secluded clearing surrounded by towering evergreens. The morning frost clung to the edges of the wild grasses. The sky above was a piercing, cloudless blue. We did not bring an audience. We did not bring a photographer or an oversized novelty check. We brought a small young aspen tree, its root ball, wrapped tightly in rough burlap. Nathan retrieved a steel shovel from the trunk of our vehicle. He walked to the center of the clearing. He drove the blade into the dark, rich soil, turning over the earth with steady, rhythmic movements. His breathing remained calm and measured. I knelt beside the shallow opening. I unwrapped the burlap, letting the loose dirt crumble against my palms. The soil felt cold and grounding. It felt real. We lowered the sapling into the earth together. We packed the dirt around the fragile trunk, securing its place on the mountainside. The aspen is a remarkably resilient species. Its roots weave deep underground, connecting with others surviving harsh winters to produce brilliant gold leaves in the fall. It withstands the freezing temperatures by anchoring itself firmly in the ground. It was a fitting tribute to the daughter we carried in our hearts. We stood shoulder to shoulder, looking at the slender branches swaying in the mountain breeze. We named the tree Lily. It was a quiet, honest memorial. It required no donations. It required no stage. It only required the two people who loved her most. Nathan wrapped his arm around my shoulders. I leaned into his warmth, watching the sunlight filter through the pine canopy. I stood in that clearing, breathing in the cold mountain air, and I thought about the journey of the last 6 months. I thought about the sterile hospital room. I thought about the empty nursery and the forged medical release. I realized something profound about the nature of survival. My mother looked at my grief and saw weakness. She assumed the trauma of losing a child would render me compliant, fragile, and easily manipulated. She mistook my professional stillness for a lack of strength. She thought she could rewrite my tragedy to fund her vanity because she believed I was too broken to fight back. She did not understand that fire does not just destroy, it also hardens. The grief did not make me an easy target. It burned away every lingering trace of hesitation and obligation I held toward toxic bloodlines. It forged me into someone unbreakable. I stopped performing the role of the polite, accommodating daughter and embraced the unyielding clarity of an auditor. I learned how to separate my emotional wounds from my tactical execution. True family honors your pain. They sit with you in the quiet moments. They stand like a sentinel at the foot of your hospital bed, demanding peace on your behalf. They build a nursery with their own 2 hands and hold you steady when that room becomes a void. Parasites view your pain as a currency. They exploit your worst nightmares to fund their social climbing. They disguise their greed as maternal concern. They hand out donation envelopes while you are still bleeding. You do not owe your loyalty to a parasite, even if they share your genetic sequence. You possess the right to protect your peace. You possess the right to gather your evidence, build your boundaries, and lock the door. You have no obligation to shield the people who use your darkest hours as a stepping stone. If you have the data, you never have to shout. You just have to let the facts do the heavy lifting. You can walk into a room full of noise, open a ledger, and watch the illusions crumble into dust. That is my story. It is a tale of stolen furniture, fraudulent charities, and the devastating power of a black leather binder. It is the story of how a quiet mother protected the memory of her daughter from the very people who were supposed to cherish it. If you believe in quiet women delivering loud justice, take this as your reminder to always keep your receipts. Share this narrative with someone who needs the courage to cut off a toxic relative. Drop a comment below. Tell me what you thought of the audit. Hit that subscribe button, and I will see you in the next one.